Sometimes the most painful truths don't come crashing into your life in storms. You overhear them whispered in the quiet moments, from the people you least expect. I always believed my sister was my safe place. We weren't just siblings. We were supposed to be a team against the world. I thought the bond of blood meant loyalty, protection, and love. But one evening at her house, while I sat silently in the guest room, I heard her voice through the thin walls. Her voice speaking to our parents. First it was casual, nothing alarming. Then her words began to cut like knives, each one sharper than the last. She spoke about me like I was a burden, like I was nothing. She questioned my worth, twisted my struggles into shameful failures, and even laughed about me being the disappointment of the family. I froze in disbelief, unable to breathe, unable to move. My heart thudded in my chest as though it wanted to escape my body. I pressed my ear closer, praying I had misheard. But no, it was all there, crystal clear. My parents stayed quiet most of the time, and that silence was worse than words. It meant they didn't disagree. It meant they might have even agreed. I had walked into her house that evening thinking I belonged, thinking I had family who truly cared. But in that moment, I realized I had been living in a lie. The home I thought was filled with love was actually filled with betrayal. That night shattered something deep inside me. And once something shatters, no matter how much you try to put it back together, it never looks the same again. I never thought of myself as someone who would discover the truth in such a cruel way. Most people imagine betrayal as an argument, a fight, or maybe a dramatic confrontation where emotions explode like fireworks. But my betrayal came quietly, in whispers through a thin wall. It came on an ordinary evening, in a house where I thought I was safe. My sister's home had always been a place I associated with warmth, laughter, and the comfort of family. I didn't know that stepping into it that evening would change the way I saw everything, and everyone, for the rest of my life. The night began normally, nothing unusual. My sister had invited me over for dinner, saying our parents were also coming, and it would be nice to spend some time together. She always made it sound so casual, as if family dinners were part of our routine, though in reality they didn't happen very often. We all lived our separate lives, drifting further apart with each passing year. Still, I wanted to believe that dinners like these were her way of holding on to the closeness we once shared as kids. That hope alone was enough to make me agree. I arrived at her house just before sunset. The lights inside glowed softly against the fading sky, giving the place a warm and welcoming look. As I walked up the driveway, I felt a familiar twinge of envy, not out of malice, but from comparing my life to hers. She had it all together. The nice house, the steady career, the perfect smile she wore so easily in front of people. Meanwhile, I was still trying to piece my life into something that resembled success. Still, I told myself that envy was just a passing thought. We were family. Her victories didn't have to be my failures. She greeted me at the door with her usual hug, quick but polite, the kind that looked good to outsiders but didn't always feel genuine. "You're just in time," she said with that easy smile of hers. "Mom and Dad are already here. Dinner's almost ready." I stepped inside, breathing in the scent of roasted chicken and herbs. The dining room table was neatly set, her signature style evident in the way everything matched. The plates, the napkins, even the centerpiece. My parents were sitting on the couch in the living room, talking quietly while the news played in the background. They looked up when I entered, and my mother smiled faintly, though my father just nodded. The air felt strangely formal, like we were acquaintances meeting for an occasion rather than a family reunited. Dinner went smoothly at first. My sister kept the conversation light, asking about work, laughing at small jokes, and serving us with the grace of a perfect hostess. I tried to keep up, answering questions with polite smiles, though I felt out of place, like I was performing in a play where I didn't know the script. My parents mostly listened, chiming in here and there, but the spotlight always seemed to fall back on my sister. Her job, her home, her achievements. I noticed it, but I didn't resent it. She had earned much of what she had, and I was used to being in the shadows anyway. After dinner, my sister suggested we all move to the living room while she cleared the dishes. I offered to help, but she waved me off with that practiced graciousness of hers. "You're a guest," she said, though I had never thought of myself as a guest in her house before. Still I obeyed, retreating to the guest room for a moment under the excuse of checking my phone. That's when it happened. The walls in her house weren't thick, and the guest room was close to the kitchen. At first, I wasn't paying attention to the sounds outside. I was scrolling through messages, half listening to the faint murmur of voices. But then I heard my name. Clear as day, my name spoken in my sister's voice. Something in me stilled. My thumb froze on the screen. Instinct told me to listen, even though I knew it was wrong. "I don't know what to do about them," my sister was saying, her voice carrying with a sharpness I had never noticed before. "It's always the same thing, failure after failure. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if they'll ever get their life together." The words hit me like a slap. I sat there, barely breathing, pressing my ear closer to the wall. My mother's voice murmured something, too soft for me to catch. My sister's response was sharper, more cutting. "No, Mom, you don't understand. It's not just bad luck. It's who they are. Always struggling, always expecting sympathy. It's exhausting. I've worked hard for everything I have, and meanwhile they're still stumbling around, asking for help or pretending like they're trying. I'm tired of carrying the embarrassment." Embarrassment. That word echoed in my chest like a stone thrown into deep water. I wanted to believe I had misheard, but her tone left no room for doubt. She wasn't venting out of frustration. She was condemning me, labeling me as a weight around her neck. I strained to hear my parents' reaction. My father's voice came through then, low and hesitant. "She's your sibling," he said. "You shouldn't be so harsh." But my sister laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Harsh? I'm just being honest. You've all been too soft on them for too long. Look at where that's gotten them, nowhere. Always clinging to excuses. Sometimes I wish they'd just stop pretending and admit they're never going to make it." My chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. I had expected many things in life, but never this. Never my sister tearing me apart behind my back, never my parents sitting in silence while she did it. Their quietness felt like betrayal too, even if it wasn't spoken outright. They weren't defending me. They weren't stopping her. They were letting her words linger, letting them exist as truth. I sat on the edge of the bed, frozen. Every part of me wanted to burst through that door and scream, to demand how she could say such things, how they could sit there and listen. But I couldn't move. It was like my body had turned to stone. Instead, I stayed there, silent, my ears burning with every word. The conversation went on, my sister growing bolder, more venomous with each sentence. She mocked my failed relationships, hinted at times when I had asked for help, twisted my moments of weakness into proof that I was weak at my core. Each word was a knife, carving away at the image of family I had carried in my heart all my life. By the time the voices grew quieter, my body was trembling. I stared at the wall, seeing nothing but cracks forming in the picture I had painted of my life. The sister I thought was my ally, the parents I thought loved me unconditionally. Suddenly they all felt like strangers. When I finally left the room later that night, my sister smiled at me as though nothing had happened, her eyes bright, her voice cheerful. My parents acted the same way, polite and distant. I smiled back, though it felt like glass was shattering inside me. And that was the moment I knew. Something had broken that could never be fixed. The days after that night at my sister's house felt like walking through a dream I couldn't wake up from, though it wasn't the kind of dream you wanted to escape. It was more like being trapped inside a nightmare where everything familiar suddenly looked foreign. I went home carrying the weight of her words in my chest, and though the world outside looked exactly the same, the streets, the people, even the clutter in my apartment, inside me everything had shifted. I couldn't stop replaying what I had overheard. Her voice was lodged in my head like a needle stuck in a record, repeating the same cruel phrases over and over again. Failure, embarrassment, disappointment. It wasn't just the words, though. It was the way she had said them, so sharp, so casual, as if she were simply stating facts everyone else already knew. Worse still was my parents' silence. That silence had been deafening, louder than her insults, louder than laughter or anger. It told me they agreed, or if they didn't, then at least they didn't care enough to defend me. And once that thought took root in me, it grew like a vine, wrapping itself around everything in my mind until I could no longer see myself the way I once had. At work, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. I showed up, did my tasks, nodded through meetings, and even forced myself to join in on small talk. But underneath I was hollow. Every time someone looked at me, I wondered if they saw me the way my sister had described me. Someone who was stumbling, failing, barely holding it together. I became hypersensitive to every gesture, every glance. If a coworker sighed when I asked a question, I heard her voice mocking me, always clinging to excuses. If someone gave me advice, I felt like they were confirming that I didn't know what I was doing. Slowly, I started shrinking back, avoiding conversations, hiding behind polite smiles. My body was there, but my spirit wasn't. I had always struggled with self-doubt, but now it was like my doubts had been given fuel and set ablaze. Evenings were the worst. My apartment, once a small comfort, became a cage where my thoughts echoed against the walls. I replayed that night in my mind constantly. The clink of dishes, her voice rising and falling, my parents' silence stretching like a shadow. Sometimes I thought about calling her, confronting her directly, asking how she could say such things about me. But every time I imagined it, I felt the weight of her possible response crushing me. What if she told me, flat out, that she meant every word? What if she laughed again, that short, bitter laugh that had made my chest ache? And what if my parents, when confronted, confirmed that they agreed? That fear silenced me. So instead I kept it inside, letting it poison me in quiet ways. Family gatherings, which were already rare, became unbearable. When my sister invited me over for a weekend lunch a few weeks later, I almost said no, but part of me wanted to test whether I had imagined everything, whether perhaps I had misunderstood. Maybe her words had been taken out of context. Maybe my parents had stayed silent not because they agreed but because they didn't know what to say. I clung to those fragile maybes, desperate for them to be true. So I went. I arrived with a smile plastered on my face, pretending nothing was wrong, pretending I hadn't heard the shattering of my world just weeks earlier. The moment I saw her, though, my chest tightened. She was radiant as always, moving through her house with ease, greeting me with that same quick hug, acting as though everything was normal. My parents were already there, chatting lightly in the living room, their voices calm and cheerful. I felt like a ghost watching them, standing just outside of their world, unseen and unimportant. Every laugh they shared, every warm glance they exchanged, reminded me of the silence they had offered me when I needed their defense the most. Sitting at that table, eating the food she prepared, listening to conversations about work, vacations, and neighbors, I felt like an imposter in my own family. No one said anything cruel to my face, but the memory of what I had heard lingered, making every word sound fake, every smile look staged. I began pulling away. I made excuses not to visit, not to join family dinners, not to pick up calls right away. My sister noticed, I think, though she never confronted me directly. Instead, she left cheerful messages on my phone, her voice bright and casual, as if nothing at all had changed. My parents, too, seemed content to let the distance grow, as though they had already accepted that I was the odd one out, the one who didn't quite fit into the picture-perfect family portrait. That realization cut deep, not just because I felt excluded, but because I realized maybe I had been on the outside all along, and I had simply been too blind to see it until that night. Nights turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still I carried the burden in silence. My sleep grew restless, filled with dreams where I stood in rooms full of people, trying to speak but finding no words coming out, while my sister's laughter rang in the background. I started second-guessing everything I did, even small things like cooking a meal or paying a bill. Her words echoed through my mind. They'll never get their life together. Every mistake, no matter how small, felt like proof she had been right. My confidence, already fragile, crumbled piece by piece. Yet beneath the despair, something else began to stir, a quiet anger. At first, it was just a flicker, a small flame hidden beneath the ashes of my pain. I would think about her words and feel my chest tighten, not with sorrow but with heat. How dare she? How dare she reduce me to nothing more than an embarrassment? How dare she mock the battles I had fought, the struggles I had endured, without ever knowing what it was like to live in my shoes? And how dare my parents sit in silence, letting her words hang in the air without defense? That anger grew slowly, carefully, feeding off every memory of their quietness, every moment of my own humiliation. Still, I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I began to withdraw into myself more fully, building invisible walls around me. If my family saw me as a burden, then fine, I would stop reaching out. If they thought I was weak, then I would stop trying to prove myself to them. The walls felt protective at first, giving me space to breathe, but in truth they were prisons too, keeping me locked inside with nothing but my thoughts. Loneliness became my constant companion, whispering in my ear late at night, telling me that maybe they were right after all. But deep inside, the anger continued to grow. And though I didn't know it at the time, that anger would one day be the force that pushed me to finally speak, to finally confront, to finally reclaim the pieces of myself that their words had shattered. For now, though, I lived in the quiet storm, a storm no one else could see, carrying the weight of betrayal while the world around me spun on as if nothing at all had changed. I don't know exactly when the decision formed in my mind, but by the time another month had slipped past, the weight of silence inside me had grown unbearable, pressing against my chest like a stone I could no longer carry. I told myself again and again that I could endure it, that I could live my life without opening that wound. But the truth was, it was already wide open and bleeding every single day. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw her words written across my reflection. Failure, disappointment, embarrassment. Every time I picked up the phone and heard her cheerful voice pretending everything was fine, I felt my blood boil. I couldn't keep swallowing it. Couldn't keep pretending I hadn't heard the truth spill from her lips that night. One evening, when the loneliness in my apartment felt like it was swallowing me whole, I grabbed my jacket, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve, and I drove to her house without even calling first. The drive felt endless, the glow of the streetlights flashing over my windshield like a countdown to something inevitable. My stomach churned, my palms were slick against the steering wheel, and my mind raced through every possible outcome. Maybe she would deny it. Maybe she would laugh in my face. Maybe my parents would appear, siding with her all over again. Or maybe, just maybe, there was a chance she would look at me, see my pain, and regret what she had done. That fragile hope was the only thing that kept me from turning the car around and retreating back into silence. When I pulled up outside her house, the windows glowed with the warm light I had once loved, the kind of glow that had always felt like family. But now, looking at it, I felt none of the old comfort, only a hollow ache in my chest. My legs were heavy as I climbed the steps and rang the bell. She opened the door after a moment, surprised but smiling, as if my sudden arrival was nothing unusual. "Hey," she said, her voice light. "I didn't know you were coming. What a nice surprise." I forced myself to meet her eyes, though everything inside me screamed to look away. Her smile faltered just a little when she saw my expression, the way my lips pressed into a thin line, the tightness in my shoulders. She stepped back to let me in, and I crossed the threshold, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain she could hear it. We stood in her living room, the silence between us stretching like a wire pulled too tight. She started to speak again, her tone cautious now. "Is everything okay?" she asked. And that was it, the crack that let everything I had been holding back spill out. "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Everything is not okay." She blinked, startled, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty cross her face. "What do you mean?" she asked, her smile gone now, replaced with a guarded seriousness. I took a deep breath, feeling the storm rise inside me, and then I said the words that had been clawing at my throat for weeks. "I heard you. That night. I heard everything you said about me to Mom and Dad." Her face froze, and in that frozen silence, I saw the truth. There was no denial, no confused tilt of the head, no rush to explain, just the sudden stillness of someone caught. My voice shook, but I kept going, the words pouring out faster now, as though they had been waiting for this moment. I was in the guest room. The walls aren't thick. I heard you call me a failure, an embarrassment. I heard you laugh at me, mock me, tear me apart like I wasn't even your sibling. And I heard Mom and Dad sit there in silence, letting you do it. Do you have any idea what that did to me? For a moment she said nothing. Her lips parted slightly as if searching for words. Then with a sigh she shook her head and muttered, "You shouldn't have been listening." That sentence hit harder than any insult, because it wasn't an apology, it wasn't even an explanation. It was blame. As if the problem wasn't what she had said, but the fact that I had heard it. Something inside me snapped then, a dam breaking, and all the pain I had swallowed for weeks rushed out as anger. "Don't you dare make this about me listening," I said, my voice rising. "This isn't about where I was standing or what I heard. This is about what you said. About how easily you ripped me apart like my whole life is some kind of joke to you. Do you know what it feels like to hear the person you trusted most in the world talk about you like that? To realize your own sister sees you as nothing but a burden." Her eyes hardened then, the hesitation melting away into something sharper. "I was just being honest," she said coldly. "Someone had to say it. You've been drifting for years, stumbling from one mistake to another, and everyone keeps tiptoeing around it. I'm tired of pretending. You can't expect me to keep carrying your mess and acting like it doesn't affect all of us." Her words landed like blows, each one deepening the wound. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Carrying me," I repeated, my voice breaking. "What have you ever carried for me? I've struggled, yes, I've made mistakes, but I've never asked you to live my life for me. All I ever wanted was support, love, the kind of family bond one thought we shared. But clearly I was wrong. Clearly, I was the only one who ever believed in us." The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in, but I couldn't stop now. I told her about the nights I had replayed her words, about the way her laughter had echoed in my dreams, about how her voice had wormed its way into my every thought, making me doubt myself at every turn. "Do you understand?" cried. "Do you understand what it's like to have your sister's voice in your head every single day, telling you that you're worthless? Do you understand how it feels to realize your parents agreed, or at least didn't care enough to defend you? You didn't just hurt me, you broke something that can't be fixed." For the first time I saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes, something like guilt or maybe just discomfort, but it vanished quickly, replaced with cold resolve. "Maybe it needed to be broken," she said quietly. "Maybe you needed to hear the truth." And that was it. The final blow, the final confirmation that there was no hidden kindness, no regret, no love buried beneath her cruelty. She meant every word. My chest ached so deeply I thought I might collapse, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Then I guess you've finally got what you wanted," I said, my voice steadier now, not from peace but from the exhaustion of fighting. "Because whatever bond we had, whatever family I thought we were, it's gone. You've made sure of that." With that I turned and walked out, my legs trembling, my vision blurred by tears I could no longer hold back. The cool night air hit me like a wave as I stumbled toward my car, each breath sharp and painful. Behind me, the warm glow of her house shone like it always had, but now I knew it was nothing more than a mask, a light that hid the darkness inside. Driving away, I felt empty, shattered, but also strangely lighter. The confrontation had torn me open, left me raw and bleeding, but it had also freed me from the weight of silence. I had spoken my truth, even if it changed nothing. And though I didn't know what the future held, one thing was clear. The sister I thought I knew was gone, and in her place was someone I could no longer recognize, someone I could no longer call family. In the days that followed my confrontation with my sister, I walked through life with a strange mixture of emptiness and heaviness, as though my heart had been hollowed out yet weighted down with stones. I had expected, foolishly perhaps, that once I let the truth out, once I told her what her words had done to me, something inside me might feel lighter, freer, maybe even stronger. And in some small way that had happened. The silence was no longer suffocating me, the secret no longer gnawed at my insides. But in its place was a new kind of pain, a sharp and unrelenting ache that reminded me that what I had heard wasn't a mistake, wasn't a misunderstanding. She had confirmed it all to my face. She believed I was a burden, she believed I was a failure, and she felt no regret in saying it. That certainty was worse than the doubt, because doubt at least left room for hope, and now even that had been taken from me. I tried to throw myself into work, into small routines, anything that could distract me, but her voice lingered in the back of my mind, playing over and over, mixing with the silence of my parents that night. And of course, I knew it was only a matter of time before they would find out that I had confronted her. It happened sooner than I expected. One evening, my phone lit up with my mother's number, and though part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail, something inside me knew that answering was unavoidable. Her voice was calm but edged with tension, the kind of tone she used when she was trying to control the conversation before it even began. "I heard you went to your sister's house," she said, skipping past greetings, pleasantries, anything that could soften the blow. "She told us about what happened." My stomach dropped, my chest tightening as though a hand had wrapped around my ribs. I swallowed hard before answering, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. Yes, I confronted her. I had to. There was silence on the line for a moment, and then my father's voice joined in, firmer, more critical. "Why would you do that? Why stir up more trouble? Families fight, people say things they don't mean, and you're making it worse by dragging it out." I felt my throat tighten, a lump forming that made it hard to speak, but I forced the words out anyway. She didn't say it in a fight. She wasn't angry. She said it calmly, like it was the truth. I heard every word, and you both sat there and let her say it. Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how it feels to realize your own family sees you as nothing? My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated how weak I sounded, but I couldn't stop. There was a pause, and then my mother sighed heavily, the sound full of weariness and dismissal. "You always take things too personally," she said softly. "Your sister didn't mean it like that. She was just frustrated, you know how she gets sometimes. She's under pressure, she works hard, and she says things without thinking. You shouldn't hold it against her." The words stung, not just because of what they meant but because of what they revealed. They weren't going to defend me. They weren't going to acknowledge the hurt. They were going to protect her, excuse her, minimize my pain so they didn't have to face the reality of what had been said. A rush of anger surged through me, burning hotter than it ever had before. "Don't tell me I'm taking it personally," I snapped, my voice trembling with rage. She called me a failure, an embarrassment, like my whole existence was a mistake. She laughed at me, and you both just sat there. You didn't stop her, you didn't say a word. And now you want me to pretend it was nothing? Do you even care about me at all? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the line, the sound of my own ragged breathing. Finally my father spoke, his voice sharp and cold. "You need to stop making everything about you. Your sister has done well for herself, she's carrying responsibilities you can't even imagine, and she's right. You've been struggling for years. Maybe instead of being angry at her, you should look at yourself and think about why she feels that way." His words cut through me like a blade, each one confirming the fear I had tried so desperately to fight. They did agree with her. They did see me as a disappointment. And rather than comforting me, rather than offering love when I was at my lowest, they chose to stand with her, to defend her cruelty, to blame me for being hurt by it. I felt the tears spilling down my cheeks, hot and unstoppable, but I didn't wipe them away. Instead, I let the truth sink in, as painful as it was. I had spent so long trying to earn their approval, bending myself into shapes I thought they would love, hiding my failures, exaggerating my small victories, all because I wanted to believe that family meant unconditional love. But now, with their voices cutting through me, I realized I had been chasing something that didn't exist. To them, love had conditions. Respect had conditions. Belonging had conditions. And I had failed to meet them. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry the weight of my decision. "I can't keep pretending we're a family when all I am to you is a disappointment. I've spent my whole life trying to prove myself to you, trying to make you proud, But no matter what I do, it's never enough. So if all I am to you is an embarrassment, then fine. I won't burden you anymore." My mother's voice rose then, desperate, panicked. "Don't say that. Don't twist our words. We love you, we just want what's best for you." But I shook my head, even though they couldn't see me, tears still streaming down my face. "No," I said firmly. "You love the version of me you wanted, not the person I actually am. And I can't keep breaking myself apart to fit into that image. Not anymore." I hung up before they could respond, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. The silence that followed was different from the silence of before. This silence was final, like a door closing, like a chapter ending. I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands, sobs shaking through me until I could barely breathe. But beneath the grief, beneath the heartbreak, there was also a flicker of something else. Something small but undeniable. Freedom. For the first time I had said the words I had always been too afraid to say. I had stopped begging for their love, stopped chasing their approval. And though the loneliness of that truth was almost unbearable, it was also honest. In the days that followed, I ignored their calls, their messages, their attempts to smooth things over. Each one was filled with excuses, with justifications, with half-hearted pleas for me not to be so sensitive. Not once did they apologize. Not once did they acknowledge the pain. And with each ignored call, each unopened message, I felt myself pulling further away from them, the bond stretching thinner and thinner until I wondered if it might finally snap. I didn't know what that would mean for my future, but I knew one thing with certainty. The family I had once believed in, the family I had fought so hard to belong to, no longer existed. Maybe it never had. And though the grief of that truth threatened to consume me, I also knew that from here on out, I would have to find my way alone, not as the person they saw me as, but as the person I really was. The weeks after that final call unfolded like an endless gray sky, heavy and unbroken, yet within the dull stretch of days something inside me began to shift. At first, I drifted through them as if in a daze, the silence of my phone a constant reminder of the gap between me and my family, a void that used to be filled with obligations, guilt, and the desperate scramble for scraps of affection. Now there was nothing, and though the emptiness was crushing at times, there was also a strange clarity in it. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for their approval, wasn't measuring my worth against my sister's accomplishments, wasn't tailoring every choice in my life to the fear of their disappointment. It was as if the silence had stripped away the noise of their expectations, leaving me face to face with myself. And though at first I didn't know if I could bear that, slowly I began to realize it was the only way I could finally breathe. I started small. I went for long walks by myself, sometimes wandering through streets I'd never explored, letting the rhythm of my footsteps quiet the storms in my mind. I found a cafe tucked away on a corner, its walls lined with mismatched bookshelves, and began to spend afternoons there with a notebook, scribbling thoughts I had never dared to put into words. Sometimes they came out as half poems, sometimes just fragments of raw anger or fragile hope, but in those pages I saw myself unfiltered, without the shadow of my family's judgment. And little by little, I began to realize that what I had always been chasing from them, the acceptance, the recognition, the love, I might be able to find within myself, if only I had the courage to keep searching. But healing wasn't a straight path. Some nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with the echo of my father's words, the sharpness of my sister's laughter, my mother's dismissive sigh. Memories would come flooding back uninvited. Family dinners where my silence was ignored. Holidays where my small achievements were overshadowed by her grand stories. Moments when I had tried to share my dreams only to see their faces glaze over with polite disinterest. Each memory was like reopening an old wound, and I would cry until exhaustion finally dragged me into uneasy sleep. Yet even in those moments of despair, there was a difference now. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't gaslighting myself into believing it had been love all along. I could finally admit the truth. I had been hurt, I had been unseen, and it wasn't my fault. And somehow that truth, though bitter, carried with it a strange kind of relief. One afternoon, about a month after that final call, I ran into an old friend from school, someone I hadn't seen in years. She recognized me instantly, and after the initial surprise, we sat down in the park to catch up. We talked about work, about the strange turns life had taken, and eventually, without meaning to, I found myself telling her pieces of what had happened with my family. I expected her to look uncomfortable, to change the subject, but instead she listened quietly, her eyes full of compassion. When I finished, she simply said, "That sounds unbearably hard. I'm sorry they made you feel that way. But you're not what they said you are." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had heard similar reassurances before from acquaintances, from coworkers, even from strangers online, but something about hearing it from someone who had known me in a different time of my life, who remembered me before all this pain, made it feel more real. It was the first time in a long time that I believed maybe I wasn't defined by their rejection. Maybe the person I had always been, the dreamer, the quiet listener, the one who cared deeply even when it wasn't returned, still had worth. That encounter lingered with me, like a seed planted in the soil of my brokenness. From there, I started making choices not out of fear but out of curiosity. I signed up for a community class in painting, something I had once loved as a teenager before abandoning it because my sister had mocked my childish hobbies. Sitting in front of a blank canvas again, brush in hand, I felt a nervous thrill, like rediscovering a piece of myself I thought I had lost forever. The first strokes were clumsy, hesitant, but soon the colors began to flow, and with each one I felt a little lighter. The class was filled with people of all ages and stories, none of whom cared about my failures or my sister's successes. They only cared about creating. In that room, I wasn't an embarrassment. I was just me. And for the first time that felt like enough. My family still tried to reach me occasionally, texts that oscillated between guilt-tripping and casual updates, as if nothing had happened. I read them sometimes, my heart twisting with a mix of longing and anger, but I never replied. I knew that if I let them back into my life without real change, the cycle would only begin again. And though part of me still ached for reconciliation, for the impossible fantasy where they would finally see me, finally apologize, finally love me without conditions, another part of me knew that clinging to that dream would only keep me trapped. So instead I chose distance. I chose the people who did see me, the friend who checked in after our talk, the strangers in my painting class who laughed and shared stories, the kind barista at the cafe who remembered my order. They were small connections, maybe, but they were real, and they reminded me that family wasn't just blood. Family was anyone who offered you love without asking you to shrink yourself first. As the months passed, the sharpness of the pain dulled, though it never fully disappeared. I knew it never would. Betrayal by those who were supposed to love you unconditionally leaves scars that don't fade easily. But I also knew that scars weren't just reminders of pain. They were proof of survival. Every time I caught myself laughing genuinely at something, every time I filled another page in my notebook, every time I stepped back from a finished painting and felt proud, I realized that I was building a life beyond their rejection. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was mine. The last time I heard my sister's voice was on a voicemail she left one evening. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, as if she were reaching out not because she missed me but because she wanted to ease her own conscience. "Hey, it's been a while," she said. "We should talk. I think you're blowing things out of proportion. Let's just move on." I listened to it once, then deleted it. For years I would have clung to those words, would have begged for the crumbs of her attention, but now I saw them for what they were. Another attempt to rewrite the story so she wouldn't have to face what she had done. And I realized, with a quiet certainty, that I no longer needed her voice to define me. My story didn't belong to her, or to my parents. It belonged to me. Standing by my window that night, looking out at the city lights flickering against the dark, I felt a calmness I hadn't known in years. My family might never change, they might never see me for who I truly was, but that no longer had the power to break me. I had found pieces of myself in the ruins of their rejection, and I had stitched them back together into something stronger, something truer. I whispered the words into the quiet room, words I had once longed to hear from them but now offered to myself. "You are enough." And for the first time I believed it. Sparkles, if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Sparkle subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more powerful and emotional stories every week.